Donald Henry Gaskins was born on the 13th of March 1933 in Florence County in South Carolina. His mother was called Julia Parrott and had many children, all who were born out of wedlock and were all known as illegitimate children. Gaskins attended local schools but wasn't bright academically, and due to the fact that he was so much smaller than his peers, he gained the nickname Pee Wee. This stuck to him throughout his adult life. His life started badly and he lived through a lot of neglect by his mother, who found it hard to parent so many children. She even went along with the nickname Pee Wee that Gaskins was given. She used it so extensively that Gaskins didn't even know his real name. His mother had many boyfriends throughout his young life, and all of the men didn't want a ready-made family in tow. So his mother left the children for long periods to be with the men in her life. She was also said to look the other way when they took to beating Gaskins or his siblings. By the age of 11, Gaskins had made a name for himself. He had left school already and started to work on cars locally, where he met with two boys around the same age as him and were known by the names of Danny and Marsh. The three boys caused a lot of trouble for local residents. They broke into houses and stole from neighbours. They called themselves the Trouble Trio and liked to live up to that name and instill fear in people who were to come across them. They assaulted and abused many young boys and girls in their town, all who were too scared to go to the police or tell their parents. After one terrible incident where the boys sexually assaulted a girl, the parents of this girl found out and beat the Trouble Trio terribly. Then not long after this incident, Danny and Marsh left the neighbourhood, and Gaskins was again all alone to commit crime. And that is what he continued to do until late 1946, still aged 13. He was caught in someone's house trying to steal their belongings, when the girl who lived there decided to try and save the items and hit Gaskins with a weapon. He was not severely hurt and took the weapon from the girl, which was an axe, and returned the blows on her. She somehow survived this brutal attack and was able to tell the police all they needed to know. And this was now time for Gaskins to get some form of retribution for his previous actions. He was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and sentenced to attend the South Carolina Industrial School for Boys until he turned 18. Incident after incident happened to Gaskins while he was there due to his small size, and eventually he escaped. This was short-lived. After a time serving in a carnival, he went back to the school to finish his time and was released at aged 18. Gaskins was free and took work at a tobacco farm, but trouble was never too far away from this man, and he and a colleague had an idea that was to fraudulently burn down barns for a fee so the owners could collect on the insurance. This was going well until his employer got wind of the deceit from his daughter. When he confronted Gaskins, he ploughed a hammer into her head, and she died instantly. Her name was Hazel Brazel. Gaskins now had many victims to his name, but his crimes had now escalated to murder. He was arrested, and instead of a life sentence, he was only given a mere 5 years for attempted murder and was to be held at the South Carolina Penitentiary. Gaskins knew what was to come in prison. He feared going there due to his size and the fact that when he was in the boys' school, he was attacked many times. So he had to think of a way that people would be afraid of him rather than the other way round. So he killed the most feared man in prison at that time. No one was to call him Pee Wee anymore. He was the aggressor rather than the victim now. People feared him and he was considered the power man, and remained with that title until he escaped in 1955 while hiding in the back of a rubbish truck, and managed to get himself to Florida. But this again was short-lived, and he was rearrested and kept in prison until his paroled release in 1961. Gaskins went back to making money the only way he knew how, by committing burglaries and selling the loot. During the 2 years after he was paroled, he sexually assaulted a young girl, which he was arrested for, but he escaped again while he was on bail and then recaptured in Georgia and given an 8-year term for his crimes. Yet again, he was paroled. This was in November 1968. After his release, he took work with a roofing company, and in his time away from work, he spent it picking up hitchhikers and murdering them. He was an incredibly vicious man. He would torture these people, loving the fact that he was in full control and would be able to do anything to the people he attacked. He murdered by strangulation, stabbing, and many other ways. This continued for around 2 years, not knowing how many victims he had, not knowing who they were. Then his killings became more personal. In 1970, he murdered his young niece and her friend, Janice and Patricia. After these two, he went on to kill many people for personal reasons. They either disrespected him, or they owed him money, or simply they looked at him funny. He had no rhyme or reason for these murders. He just enjoyed it. He buried many of his victims in shallow graves where he killed them. Then, to make himself some money, he decided to use his murderous intent to do this. He was hired to kill. The woman who hired him was Suzanne Owens. She wanted her boyfriend, Silas Yates, killed, and Gaskins was happy to oblige for the right price. Unfortunately, this murder was not without witnesses. So Gaskins killed a further 4 people to stop himself being reported to the police. Finally, his time was up. The police were closing in on this despicable human being, and on the 14th of November 1975, Gaskins was arrested after Walter Neely reported that he had witnessed a man killing 2 men by the names of Dennis Bellamy and Johnny Knight, and the perpetrator was Gaskins. He also told the police that he knew that this man had committed further murders, telling them that Gaskins had told him of his crimes. Then, on December the 4th, 1975, police were to make a horrendous discovery. Gaskins led the authorities to his landing prospect, and they dug to find 8 further victims of Gaskins. He was now being charged with 8 murders. The trial lasted 4 days, and on the 28th of May, his sentence was passed. He was to be given the death penalty. But this was later commuted to 8 life terms in prison to serve concurrently, due to the changes in law on capital punishment. We would all think that this was the end of Gaskins' victim list, but it was not. While he was in prison, he was approached by a man called Tony Climo, who knew that Gaskins was in the same prison as Rudolph Tyner, who was also serving life for the murders of Bill and Myrtle Moon, who were killed at their shop during a bungled armed robbery. Tony was the son of Bill and Myrtle and wanted Tyner to be killed for his crimes. So Gaskins, with nothing to lose, took the contract. He wired a radio to explosives, and when Tyner turned it on, it blew up and killed him instantly. He was now known as the meanest man in America, and due to the fact that the reinstatement of the death penalty in South Carolina in 1978, Gaskins was now given the death sentence instead of life in prison. Gaskins had spent time describing his feelings, which he called troublesome, and would only be calmed after he had killed. He had spoken that he had killed over 50 men along the highways, as well as a friend and neighbour. All this happening while he was married with a child. Gaskins loved the accolade as the power man, so spent much time in prison confessing to every murder he possibly could, Sadly, not all of them could be assigned to him, and the police did not know which stories were true and which were not. He believed he had a special mind and described to a journalist that with this special mind he had permission to kill. If all of his confessions were taken seriously and all the murders he confessed to were assigned to him, he would be the worst serial killer in America, with over 100 murders confessed to, but not all could be substantiated. Gaskin tried to avoid the electric chair by confessing to further murders. This did not stop the execution date from nearing. He even cut himself to stop himself dying by the court's ruling, but all of these acts were in vain. When being led to the chair, Gaskin's last words, "When they put me to death, I'll die remembering the freedom and the pleasure of my life. I'll die knowing that there are others coming along to take my place, and that most of them will never get caught." And then, on the 6th of September 1991, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was sat in the chair and electrocuted. The question is, were the sentences passed for his earlier crimes enough? Could the other murders have been avoided if the sentences were tougher? Thank you so much for your continued support. Feel free to leave a comment, as we enjoy reading them. If you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories from Crime Busters.